My name is Eleanor, and I'm 67 years old. The night I overheard my daughter-in-law whisper that I was a burden, something inside me cracked beyond repair. For most of my life, I was a school teacher, the kind who stayed late to help children read, the one who remembered birthdays, who baked cookies for the staff room. My husband Henry used to tell me that my heart was too soft for this world. He'd say it with a laugh, brushing flour from my cheek as we danced in the kitchen. Those were golden years full of warmth, laughter, and ordinary happiness. But Henry passed away 5 years ago. Cancer, swift and cruel. After that, my world shrank to the quiet hum of the house we built together. Days bled into nights, and loneliness became my constant companion. Then, last year, I suffered a mild stroke. It frightened Daniel, my only son. He came rushing over, his voice thick with worry. "Mom, you can't stay here alone anymore," he insisted. "You'll move in with us. Olivia and I will take care of you." At the time, I thought it was love speaking. I didn't know that pity often wears love's clothing. So I moved into Daniel's house, or rather, their house. It was modern, spotless, filled with pale furniture that looked too delicate to sit on. Olivia welcomed me with open arms. "We'll make you comfortable here," she said. Her voice sweet as honey. "Your family, Eleanor. Like my own mother." For the first few months, things were fine. We ate dinners together, and Olivia would ask about Henry, pretending to listen as I told old stories. She bought me a soft blanket for my room and a new teacup set. I thought, maybe this arrangement will work. Maybe this could even be home. But then, little things started to change. Olivia stopped sitting with me at breakfast. The soft good mornings turned into curt nods. My favorite chair in the living room somehow migrated to the basement. Daniel seemed distant too, distracted by work, by life, by her. I told myself not to take it personally. After all, young people are busy. But there was a heaviness in the air. Something unspoken pressing against the walls of that house. Then came that night. It was late past midnight. I had trouble sleeping and went downstairs for some tea. As I stood by the kitchen doorway, I heard voices low and tired. "She's becoming such a burden, Daniel," Olivia whispered. "You know she is." I froze, teacup in hand. The sound of her voice cut through me like glass. Daniel didn't answer right away. There was a long silence, and in that silence, my heart screamed for him to say something, anything, to defend me, to remind her that I was his mother, not some old furniture taking up space. But when he finally spoke, it was quiet, resigned. "I know," he said softly. "I know." The teacup trembled in my hands. I turned, slipping back toward my room before they could see me. My chest ached, not from my heart, but from something deeper, the breaking of trust. I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling. Every kindness Olivia had shown me replayed in my mind like scenes from a play, each one now dripping with false sweetness. I realized I had become invisible in my own family's home. In the morning, I smiled as though nothing had happened. I thanked Olivia for breakfast. I asked Daniel about work. They thought I was none the wiser. But something had shifted in me, something small but sharp. For the first time in years, I saw people clearly. I saw how Olivia flinched when I entered the room, how Daniel avoided my gaze when she complained. And I realized something. They didn't want me there. Not out of cruelty, perhaps, but out of selfish comfort. So I started listening. When Olivia whispered on the phone, I took note of her words. When she smiled too widely at Daniel, I studied her eyes, they never smiled back. When Daniel mentioned rearranging finances, I wrote the date down in my little journal. I had spent my life believing the best in people, but I was done being naive. I wouldn't yell, or cry, or beg for respect. That's not who I am. No, I would do something much quieter, much stronger. I would listen and plan. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud, sometimes it begins with silence. What Olivia didn't know was that from that night forward, I started listening and planning. Once you realize you're unwanted, every small kindness feels like a lie. The morning after I overheard Olivia whisper those words, The world looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The sun still poured through the kitchen window, the clock still ticked, and Daniel still kissed his wife goodbye before leaving for work. But underneath it all, a quiet crack had formed in the foundation of that home, and I could feel it widening. Olivia smiled at me as she handed me my tea. "You didn't sleep much last night, did you?" she asked casually. I smiled back. "I'm fine, dear, just restless." It's strange when you start seeing someone's real face, you also begin to notice every disguise they wear. I noticed how her eyes darted around the room when she spoke to me, how she sighed when I asked for help reaching something, how she locked certain cabinets that used to be open. Even the grocery receipts changed. She started keeping them in a drawer by the stove, counting each cent. When Daniel wasn't home, she'd mutter about electricity bills or the cost of my medication, as though every breath I took added to her burden. Daniel, my sweet boy, barely noticed. He was buried in work, always late, always tired. When he came home, Olivia turned into a different person, all smiles and softness. She'd rub his shoulders, call him darling, and say things like, "Your mother had a lovely day today, didn't you, Eleanor?" I'd smile, nod, and play along. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break, but I started writing things down. Every comment, every small cruelty, every receipt that went missing, every time she left the house dressed for yoga but came back hours later smelling like perfume and wine. I wasn't sure what I was collecting, but I knew one day it would matter. At first, I thought I'd confront her, tell Daniel the truth, demand my dignity. But I knew how that would go. Olivia had mastered the art of manipulation. She'd twist my words, turn tears into weapons. I couldn't win her game by playing it her way. I kept my silence, but I also kept my eyes open. When I had my stroke, Daniel took over my finances temporarily. He said it was just until I recovered. Somehow, it never went back to my name. My pension still came in, but Olivia always helped manage the bills. I asked to see the statements once, and she brushed it off with a smile. "Don't worry about that, Mom. We've got it handled." That word "handled" stuck to me like a thorn. One afternoon, when Olivia went to her yoga class, I opened the small drawer where she kept the mail. There were bills, flyers, and one envelope addressed to me that had never been opened, my annual statement from the bank. My hands shook as I slid it out. My account had been accessed multiple times in the last 3 months. Withdrawals I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to confront her, but then I stopped. I remembered Henry's voice in my mind, calm, steady, always reminding me that rash actions never lead to good ends, so instead, I called Mr. Green. He was Henry's old lawyer, a man of quiet wisdom, the kind who measured every word. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but when I explained everything, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said in that low, reassuring tone, "Eleanor, do nothing for now. Keep your records. Don't let them know you suspect anything. I'll help you when the time is right." It was the first time in months that I felt like I wasn't alone. From then on, I began observing Olivia the way a teacher watches a mischievous student. Every lie, every smirk, every whisper, all of it went into my little notebook, hidden behind the lining of my suitcase. One evening, Daniel came home late again. I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. Olivia's voice was sharp, impatient. "When are we going to fix the will? What if something happens to her? You'll be left with nothing." Daniel sighed. "It's not that simple. She still owns the house, Liv." I held my breath in the hallway. "My house. My name's still on the deed." Olivia huffed. "She doesn't even use it. She's old, Daniel. You said yourself she's not the same since her stroke. She doesn't even understand half of this stuff." That one stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it came from someone who wanted to believe it was true. Daniel didn't answer. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. After that night, I called Mr. Green again. I told him I wanted to secure everything, my house, my pension, my will, quietly, legally, and completely. He said, "Then we'll begin with your property. Leave it to me. And Eleanor, don't let anger guide you. Let wisdom do it." From that day forward, I became two versions of myself. To Olivia, I was the harmless old woman who forgot where she put her glasses and took too long to climb the stairs. I smiled when she mocked me and thanked her when she served me cold food. But inside, I was sharp, watching, listening, waiting. The days grew colder, and the distance between us turned from quiet tension to invisible walls. Daniel floated between us like a ghost, trapped, guilty, blind. Sometimes, I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized myself, not because of age, but because of the strength growing behind my eyes. I didn't raise my voice or shed tears anymore. I didn't need to. My silence had weight. My patience had purpose. Because sometimes, the cruelest punishment for those who whisper is to make them realize how loud your silence can become. And what I observed next would turn every whisper into evidence. Olivia's smile could melt ice until I realized it was sharp enough to cut through me. In the weeks that followed, that smile became her favorite weapon. Every time Daniel was around, she wore it like armor. "Would you like more tea, Eleanor?" She'd chirp sweetly. "You must be tired, you've done so much today." And Daniel, bless him, would smile proudly, thinking his wife was a saint for taking care of his aging mother. But when he left for work, that same smile twisted into something else, tight, thin, laced with irritation. She began leaving subtle reminders that I didn't belong. The cozy shawl Henry had bought me on our 40th anniversary disappeared one morning. When I asked about it, she laughed lightly. "Oh, that old thing." It was covered in moth holes. I tossed it. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded. "Thank you, dear. I'm sure it was for the best." Inside, though, I made another note in my journal. Date. Time. Words. There were other things, too. My favorite mug gone. My framed photo of Henry suddenly cracked. "It fell," she said with a shrug. "You should be more careful with your things." Every cruelty was wrapped in politeness. Every insult dressed as advice. "You should get more rest," she'd say, when she meant stay out of the way. "Maybe you should spend more time in your room," when she meant don't exist where I can see you. It's remarkable how abuse can hide behind a smile. Daniel didn't notice. He was exhausted from work, trying to climb the corporate ladder. When he came home, Olivia transformed. Her voice softened, her laugh sparkled, her hands gently brushed his sleeve as she served him dinner. He saw what she wanted him to see. And I played my part too, the quiet, grateful mother who never complained, the one who thanked her for helping and smiled at every subtle dig. I knew that the louder she believed in her control, the harder she would fall. Behind the scenes, I met with Mr. Green again. We met in the corner booth of a small cafe that smelled like cinnamon and rain. He looked older, his hair more silver than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He adjusted his glasses and said, "You're sure you want to proceed with the new documents, Eleanor? Once we make these changes, there's no going back." I sipped my tea and nodded. "I'm sure. I want to protect what Henry and I built," he smiled faintly. "Then we'll begin by securing your savings. We can place part of it in a private trust under your name. No one else can access it." I exhaled, relief washing over me. "And the house?" He leaned closer. "We'll handle that next, slowly, quietly. Let them believe everything is the same." When I returned home that evening, I found Olivia sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Where were you?" she asked flatly. "I went to the park," I said, smiling. "The air was nice." She glanced up. Suspicious, but uninterested. "You should be careful. You're not as young as you think." "I'll remember that," I replied, still smiling. That night, as I listened to their laughter drifting from the living room, I wondered how love between mother and son could be eroded by one woman's poison. I didn't blame Daniel, not entirely. He was kind, loyal, and too trusting. I'd raised him that way. Perhaps too well. Days passed, each one blurring into the next, each one peeling away another layer of her performance. Olivia became bolder. She made comments about downsizing, about how much easier life would be if things were simpler. She'd look at me with that sharp smile and say, "You know, Eleanor, if you ever wanted to move into a nice home with people your age, we'd visit all the time." I smiled back, the way she expected me to. "That's very kind of you, dear. I'll think about it." But inside, I laughed. Because while she was busy planning my disappearance, I was planning my permanence. The following week, she brought up the house. She did it casually, as if she were asking about dinner. "Daniel and I were talking," she began. "If we transferred the deed, we could renovate, you know? Maybe add a guest suite for you. It would make things easier in the long run." I looked up from my knitting and met her eyes. "Oh, I wouldn't want to trouble you with paperwork," I said softly. "The house has too many memories." "Henry built the porch with his own hands." She smiled tightly. "Of course. Just something to think about." That evening, I called Mr. Green again. "It's time," I told him. "Let's handle the house." He chuckled. "I thought you'd say that. We'll protect your name, Eleanor, legally and completely." It was strange, the calm that came after that call. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Olivia's words, not of her whispers, not even of her plans. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt in control. And when Olivia asked the next morning, "Are you sure you're comfortable here, Eleanor?" I smiled sweetly and said, "More than ever." She thought I was weak, but she was about to sign her own undoing. Sometimes, the smallest conversation can plant the deepest seed of justice. When I walked into Mr. Green's office that morning, the autumn air was cool enough to sting my cheeks. His office sat on the corner of Main and Willow, tucked between a florist and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon rolls. I'd been there before, years ago, with Henry back when we were drafting our first will. Now, walking through that same door alone, I felt both older and strangely steadier. Mr. Green looked up from his desk as I entered, his warm eyes softening with recognition. "Eleanor," he said, standing to greet me. "You look well." "Well enough," I replied. "But I'm here to make sure I stay that way." He smiled faintly. "Then let's get to work." We sat across from each other, the afternoon light falling across the stacks of papers on his desk. I explained everything, the whispers, the missing money, the talk of transferring ownership. I told him about the strange way Olivia had been trying to steer Daniel, and the fear that one day I'd wake up to find my home no longer mine. He listened carefully, nodding as I spoke, occasionally jotting notes with his fountain pen. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You've done the right thing by not confronting them. People like your daughter-in-law thrive on reaction. You've denied her that power." "I've denied her everything but my patience," I said softly. He smiled. "Good, because patience in your position is strength." We spent hours reviewing my paperwork, property deeds, old wills, financial records. Mr. Green was meticulous, explaining each step as he went. "Your husband's estate was transferred fully to you, correct?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Henry wanted to make sure I'd never be dependent on anyone. He nodded approvingly. "Smart man. Now we'll protect that legacy." He suggested we update my will entirely to reflect my current reality. "You can still include Daniel, of course," he said gently. "But as for Olivia, I don't want her to have a penny," I interrupted, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. "Not after what she's done." Mr. Green didn't judge. He simply nodded, writing it down. "Understood. We'll ensure she's excluded in a way that can't be challenged. Everything will be airtight." He paused, tapping his pen against the paper. "Tell me, Eleanor, what do you want to happen with your house?" I thought of Henry, of our porch covered in wisteria, of the afternoons I'd spent grading papers while he hummed in the garden. "I want to live there until I die," I said. "And after that, Daniel can have it if he's the man I raised him to be." Mr. Green smiled at that. "Then we'll create what's called a life estate. It allows you full control and residence until your death, and ensures ownership transfers according to your will, not theirs." I felt a weight lift from my chest. So even if Olivia tries to push me out, she can't, he said. Not legally, not financially. She'll have no say. You'll be untouchable. For a moment, I sat in silence, overwhelmed by gratitude. Then I asked, is there any way to make sure Daniel learns from this? Without me punishing him? He leaned back, thoughtful. We could include a clause, something that rewards integrity, not obedience. I smiled faintly. I like that. So we wrote it together, a clause that stated Daniel's inheritance would remain intact only if he continued to uphold certain terms of honesty and care. If he allowed anyone to mistreat me, neglect me, or manipulate my assets, he'd forfeit his claim. It wasn't revenge. It was a lesson, a mother's last piece of guidance written in ink and law. When everything was prepared, Mr. Green read it back to me in that calm, deliberate voice of his. This ensures that your son is protected if he stands on the right side of truth. And your daughter-in-law, well, she's effectively written out of existence in these documents. The words sank deep. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them. Before I left, he placed a hand on mine. Eleanor, he said softly, you're not just protecting assets. You're reclaiming dignity. I nodded, feeling tears sting my eyes. Thank you, Mr. Green. You've given me something I thought I'd lost. Hope? He asked. Control, I said. As I walked out of the office, the world felt lighter. The leaves swirled around my feet, and for the first time in months, I caught myself humming one of Henry's old tunes. But when I returned home, the air inside that house was heavy again. Olivia was standing in the kitchen, her back to me, phone pressed to her ear. I don't care how it happens, she hissed. We just need her to agree. Once the house is in Daniel's name, we're set. My hand tightened on the doorknob. She turned slightly, and I slipped quietly upstairs before she noticed me. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from clarity. I sat on my bed, breathing slowly. Let her plot, I thought. Let her believe she's winning. The more she schemes, the deeper she'll sink. That night, as I looked out the window at the streetlights flickering below, I whispered to Henry, we're almost there, love. I promise you she won't take what's ours. But Olivia was already plotting something far darker than I imagined. There's a look people get when their greed outgrows their mask. I saw that look on Olivia's face the morning she finally snapped. It started like any other day. Daniel had already left for work, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. I was in the kitchen making tea when Olivia walked in. Her steps were sharp, her expression tight. Something in her had cracked, I could see it before she even opened her mouth. Did you forget to unplug the iron again? She snapped. I blinked. The iron? Yes, she hissed. You left it plugged in yesterday. Do you realize what could have happened? You could have burned the house down. Her voice was shrill, trembling with fury that didn't belong to the moment. I looked at the counter, the iron sat there, cord neatly wrapped. I hadn't even used it. I haven't touched it in weeks, I said quietly. She slammed her hand against the table, making my teacup rattle. You always have an excuse. You think just because you're old you can do whatever you want? I'm tired of cleaning up after you. For a moment, I just stared at her. The anger pouring out of her wasn't really about an iron. It was everything she'd been holding in, the resentment, the frustration, the fear that her carefully built illusion of control was slipping. I'm sorry you feel that way, Olivia, I said softly. That calmness, my refusal to fight, only made her angrier. Her face twisted. Don't patronize me. You act so innocent, but you're manipulative. You've got Daniel wrapped around your finger. Her words cut through the kitchen like broken glass. I didn't reply. I simply turned, picked up my cup, and began walking out. Behind me, I heard her mutter, one way or another, you won't be here much longer. It was the first time she'd said it outright, the threat she'd been hinting at for months. That evening, Daniel came home while the air between us still buzzed with tension. Olivia put on her sweetest tone. Daniel, I had the worst day. Your mother forgot to unplug the iron again, I told her, but she got defensive. I stood silently by the doorway, waiting for my son to see through her lies. But Daniel just sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, please try to be more careful, okay?" His words fell like stones in my chest. Not because they hurt not anymore, but because I realized he truly couldn't see what she was doing. After dinner, I went to my room and closed the door. For the first time, I allowed myself to cry not out of weakness, but because I needed to let it all out before I could move forward. I cried for Henry, for the family I thought I had, for the woman I used to be. Then I wiped my tears, straightened my back, and reached for my notebook. I wrote down every detail of the argument, her tone, her words, even the time. I called Mr. Green the next morning. "She's unraveling," I told him. He sighed softly. "Then it's almost time. Keep recording everything and remember, don't react. People like that destroy themselves when left alone with their anger." I thanked him and promised to stay calm. But even as I said the words, I knew something darker was coming. Over the next few days, Olivia's behavior became unpredictable. One moment she was sugary sweet, offering to make me breakfast. The next she was slamming doors and muttering about ungrateful freeloaders. Then, one evening, I overheard a phone conversation that turned my stomach. She was pacing the living room, her voice low but clear. "I'm telling you, we just need to get her to agree. Once she signs the transfer, everything will be ours. Daniel's too soft, I'll make him do it if I have to." My hands clenched at my sides. She was talking about my home. The one Henry built. The one I still legally owned. I tiptoed back to my room, heart pounding. I didn't confront her, not yet. I'd learned my lesson. Confrontation only gave her more power. But I made another entry in my notebook and called Mr. Green again. "Eleanor," he said after I told him. "You're doing the right thing. Let her keep talking. Every word she speaks digs her own grave." The following morning, I decided to test something. When Olivia mentioned going to a yoga class, I asked sweetly, "Would you like me to come along? I've been wanting to stretch more." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she forced a laugh. "Oh no, it's full, maybe next time." After she left, I walked out to the mailbox and noticed something strange. A man in a suit had just pulled up in a car, delivering envelopes to a few houses. When he handed me one, I glanced at the sender, a real estate agency. I opened it, and my stomach turned cold. Inside was a flyer advertising my own house, the address, the porch, even the blue shutters Henry had painted himself. Listed as pending sale, owner relocating soon. I stood frozen on the porch, the wind tugging at the paper. She was trying to sell it, without my permission, without my knowledge. I called Mr. Green immediately, my voice trembling. "She's crossed a line." He told me to send him the flyer and promised to handle it discreetly. "Do not let her know you've seen it," he warned. "We'll take care of this legally." I hung up, my heart pounding. The weight of betrayal pressing against my ribs. That night, at dinner, Olivia was all smiles again. She complimented my dress, asked about my day, and poured me a second cup of tea. I stared at her across the table, studying her face, the perfect mask, the rehearsed warmth, the poison tucked beneath every gesture. I realized then that she wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. So I smiled back. "You've been working so hard lately, Olivia. You deserve a break." She looked startled, but she smiled anyway. "That's kind of you to say." Inside, I made a silent promise to Henry and to myself. I would not let her win. Because when someone tries to take everything from you, the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm and take back your power quietly. And the storm came dressed in silk and lies. Sometimes the truth spills not from anger, but from a single careless toast. Olivia decided to host a dinner party the week after her failed attempt to sell my home. I could tell she was trying to prove something to Daniel, to her friends, maybe even to herself. The invitations went out quickly, the menu planned with precision. She wanted everything perfect, and I was expected to play the role of the grateful old mother who should be seen but not heard. I remember watching her bustle around the kitchen that afternoon, her movements sharp and anxious. "Try not to get in the way, Eleanor," she said, not looking up from her chopping board. This dinner is really important for Daniel's career. I'll stay out of your way, I replied gently. Do you want me to set the table? She hesitated, then waved a dismissive hand. No. I've got it. Of course. She didn't. She wanted me out of sight, not because she needed the space, but because she wanted control. When the guests arrived that evening, Daniel's colleagues, a few of Olivia's friends, and her parents, the house filled with the smell of roast chicken and polished wood. Olivia moved through the crowd with her practiced grace, greeting everyone, her laughter chiming like crystal. I stayed near the end of the table, my usual place. She'd arranged the seating so that I was tucked away, nearly out of sight. I didn't mind. Being invisible had become my advantage. Dinner began with polite chatter and clinking glasses. Daniel looked proud, telling stories about work while Olivia beamed beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She was in her element, the perfect wife, the perfect hostess. Then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, Olivia decided to make her little speech. She rose to her feet, glass of wine in hand, smiling that tight, polished smile that never reached her eyes. I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight, she began. Daniel's been working so hard, and it means so much to have family and friends here to celebrate his success. She paused, then glanced down the table toward me. And of course, she added, we're especially grateful to have Daniel's mother with us. It's not easy having extra responsibilities in the house. But we manage, don't we? The room went quiet for a moment, just long enough for the words to sink in. Her tone was sweet, but the meaning was sharp. I smiled and nodded. Yes, dear. We manage. She laughed lightly. Oh, don't look so serious, everyone. I just mean, life changes when families blend generations. Sometimes we all have to make sacrifices. A few awkward chuckles rippled through the table. I could see Daniel's jaw tighten slightly, though he said nothing. Olivia mistook his silence for approval, she went on, emboldened by the attention. I mean, at some point, we'll have to think about the future. Assisted living or maybe a nice senior community somewhere comfortable, of course. It's just practical, isn't it? The words hung heavy in the air. I looked around the table, a few of her friends avoided eye contact. Her mother sipped her wine too quickly, and Daniel's colleagues shifted uncomfortably. I didn't speak. I simply looked at Olivia, really looked at her. I could see the smugness under her charm, the pride under her cruelty. So I smiled again and said quietly, You're right, dear. Planning for the future is always important. Especially when we never know what kind of surprises life can bring. Her smile faltered for half a second, but she recovered quickly. Exactly, she said, raising her glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings. I echoed softly, clinking my glass against hers. The rest of the evening dragged on, awkward laughter filling the spaces where sincerity should have been. I watched Olivia charm and flatter her guests, her voice growing louder with each glass of wine. I noticed Daniel growing quieter, his eyes darker, his smiles forced. Something in him was cracking too, maybe not enough to defend me yet, but enough to begin seeing her for who she was. When the guests finally left, the house fell silent. The only sound was the faint clink of dishes as Olivia began cleaning up. Daniel went upstairs without a word. I stayed behind, watching her from the doorway. You hosted beautifully, I said. She turned, startled. Oh, thank you. There's just one thing though, I continued, my voice calm. When you speak about people's futures, you should be careful. Sometimes, the future listens. Her brow furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Just a thought, I said, smiling faintly. Good night, Olivia. I went to my room and closed the door, the faint laughter from earlier still echoing in my ears. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote everything down, every word. Every reaction, every insult disguised as civility. I added it to the growing file of notes and documents I kept locked in my drawer. Then I picked up the phone and called Mr. Green. It's time, I said simply. Time for what, Eleanor? He asked. For me to move, I replied. Not out of the house, just out of her reach. He paused for a moment, then said, I'll arrange everything. The next morning, before the sun rose, I began packing a small suitcase just enough for a few weeks away. I looked around the room that had become both my cage and my shelter. Then I folded my shawl, the replacement one, not the real one she'd thrown away, and placed it gently on top of the bag. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being her target. It was time for her to learn what it felt like to lose control. By morning, my plan for quiet revenge was in motion. Sometimes, vanishing is the loudest message you can send. I left before sunrise. The house was still and silent, the only sound the ticking of the kitchen clock. I moved slowly, careful not to wake anyone. I'd already packed the night before a single suitcase, light enough to carry without noise. Inside it were my essentials, a few clothes, my medications, my journal, and a folder filled with every document Mr. Green had helped me secure. On the kitchen counter, I placed a note written in my neat, careful handwriting. "Don't worry, I'm safe. I just need time to think. Please don't look for me. Mom." I set down my house key beside it though. I still legally owned every inch of that home. Then I slipped out the front door and into the pale, waking light. Mr. Green's car was waiting a block away. He stepped out, his coat collar turned up against the chill. "You're certain about this?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "It's time." He drove me to a small apartment complex on the other side of town, modest, quiet, and tucked between a laundromat and a small park. The building smelled faintly of lavender and old paint, but to me, it smelled like freedom. The apartment was furnished simply. A bed, a small table, a window that faced the sunrise. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without permission. Within a few hours, my phone began to buzz relentlessly. Daniel called 6 times. Then Olivia. Then Daniel again. I didn't answer. I watched the phone light up, my name flashing again and again on the caller ID. But I let it ring. Finally, I turned it off. Mr. Green visited that afternoon, bringing groceries and a new prepaid phone, one with only his number programmed in. "Use this for emergencies," he said. "And don't tell anyone where you are, not even Daniel. He'll come around when he's ready to see the truth." I agreed. It wasn't easy, cutting off contact with my own son. But I knew if I returned too soon, nothing would change. Sometimes, you have to let people miss you before they can value you again. The days passed quietly. I unpacked slowly, arranging my few belongings in the small space. I found comfort in the routine morning tea by the window, afternoon walks in the park, evenings reading on the couch. A week later, I visited the local library and asked if they needed volunteers. The librarian, a kind woman named Carol, smiled and said they'd love the help. So, 3 days a week, I began sorting books and reading to children during story hour. The laughter of those children filled the hollow places Olivia's cruelty had carved in me. Each night, I wrote in my journal not just about Olivia or Daniel, but about myself, who I had been, who I was becoming. Freedom, I discovered, doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's just the sound of silence after years of being talked over. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Mr. Green again. He called one afternoon as I was returning from the park. "Eleanor," he said, his tone calm but measured. "You should know they've tried to access your bank account." I felt a flicker of vindication. "And they couldn't," he said. "Everything's secure. But they've also attempted to list the house for sale again. I've already sent notice through legal channels. They won't be able to touch a brick of it." I closed my eyes, the relief almost dizzying. "Thank you, Mr. Green." He paused. "They're panicking, Eleanor. Let them. Just stay quiet and let me handle it." And so I did. I stayed quiet. A few days later, Daniel left a voicemail on my new phone, the only time I'd heard his voice since leaving. "Mom, please call me. Olivia's losing it. I just want to know you're safe." I listened to the message twice, my heart heavy. I didn't respond. Not yet. He needed to sit in that discomfort to face the reality of who he'd married and what he'd allowed. Meanwhile, Mr. Green worked behind the scenes, ensuring all my assets were locked, protected, and legally untouchable. I remember sitting in my little apartment one evening, a soft rain falling outside, and realizing something profound: I wasn't lonely anymore. For years, I'd mistaken company for love. But now, alone in my own space, I felt peace. I began baking again, small batches of cookies I brought to the library. The children loved them, calling me Miss Ellie. It made me laugh. I hadn't been Miss anything in decades. Each night before bed, I'd look out the window at the city lights and whisper to Henry, "We did it, love. I'm safe now." But peace never lasts forever. One afternoon, as I was returning from the library, my prepaid phone buzzed. It was Mr. Green. "Eleanor," he said, his voice oddly tense. "We need to talk. Something's happened." My heart skipped. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Daniel and Olivia showed up at my office. They're desperate. She's furious, accusing you of abandoning them, saying you're mentally unstable." I took a slow breath. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them the truth, that you're perfectly sound and have every legal right to make your own choices." A pause. Then his voice softened. "But that's not all. Olivia tried to file for power of attorney. She was denied." I felt a wave of both disgust and satisfaction. She'd gone that far. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "Now," he said, "we wait. They've lost their control, Eleanor. It won't take long for them to start turning on each other." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of thunder rolling across the city. For the first time in months, I felt no fear, only certainty. Olivia had played every card. She had deceit, manipulation, greed, and she'd lost them all. Then, one afternoon, my lawyer called and mentioned Olivia's name. Justice doesn't always roar sometimes. It arrives in an envelope. It was a Tuesday morning when the letter came. The postman knocked gently on my apartment door, holding a thick envelope with my name typed neatly across the front. The sender's address was instantly familiar: Green and Associates, attorneys at law. For a moment I just stood there, the weight of the envelope heavy in my hands. I knew whatever was inside would change things again, maybe not for the worse, but certainly forever. I sat down at the small kitchen table, the one Mr. Green had insisted on buying for me when I first moved in, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several documents and a note in his precise handwriting. "Eleanor, Olivia, and Daniel have attempted to sell your property again. You are protected, but formal action has been taken. I've enclosed a copy of the summons and my response. Mr. Green." I read it twice. Even though I'd expected something like this, my hands still trembled slightly. She just wouldn't stop. Within an hour, I was in a cab heading toward Mr. Green's office. The autumn air had grown colder, sharper, the trees outside his building shedding their last leaves. When I walked in, his secretary smiled kindly. "He's expecting you, Mrs. Taylor." Green stood as I entered his office, motioning for me to sit. "I didn't want you to hear this through a third party," he began. "They filed a complaint, claiming you abandoned your home and that you're unfit to manage your own property." I exhaled slowly. "Unfit, that's the word she's using now." He nodded. "It's their last attempt to gain control. They've asked for a forced transfer of ownership based on neglect and incapacity. Of course, it won't hold. You've already been declared fully competent." "I've handled it." "Handled it how?" I asked. He smiled, that calm, reassuring smile I had come to trust. "With the law. We've filed an immediate counteraction. The house is protected under your life estate agreement. No judge will touch it, and I've added a protective clause to prevent any future claims." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Relief washed over me like a tide, steady and warm. "So, they can't touch anything?" "Not a brick," he said simply. "They overplayed their hand, Eleanor, and now it's time they understand the consequences of their greed." I leaned back, letting out a quiet laugh, half disbelief, half release. After everything she's done, she still thinks she can win. "People like Olivia don't stop because they're right," Mr. Green said softly. "They stop because they run out of ways to lie." I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. The world outside seemed brighter, clearer. But that peace didn't last long. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at my apartment. I recognized his knock, hesitant, familiar. When I opened the door, he looked different. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Mom," he said quietly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, motioning for him to sit. He didn't, he just stood there, wringing his hands. "I didn't know she'd done all that," he began. "I swear, I didn't know about the second attempt to sell the house until the lawyer called me. Olivia said it was just a formality, something about helping with finances." I raised a hand gently. "Daniel. Stop." He fell silent, eyes glistening. "I believe you didn't know," I said softly. "But I also believe you didn't want to know. You let her do the talking, and you closed your eyes when it was convenient." He flinched but didn't argue. "You're right," he whispered. "I just didn't want any more fights. I thought if I kept the peace, there was no peace," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Only silence. And silence is a very fragile kind of survival." He nodded, his throat tightening. "Mr. Green called. He told me everything. I know she can't touch the house anymore. I needed to tell you I'm sorry." I wanted to reach out and hold him, to tell him it was okay. But I wasn't ready, not yet. "Go home, Daniel," I said quietly. "Think about what kind of man you want to be. You're still my son, but forgiveness takes time." He nodded again, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I understand." After he left, the apartment felt heavier, filled with everything we hadn't said. I sat by the window, watching the city, lights flicker on, and realized that sometimes love doesn't die, it just retreats until it's safe to return. A week later, Mr. Green called again. His tone was lighter this time, almost amused. "It's over, Eleanor. The judge dismissed their claim immediately. Your ownership is fully recognized, and Olivia has been legally barred from making any future filings regarding your estate." I smiled for the first time in days. "You mean, yes," he said. "They lost." "Completely." He paused before adding, "Daniel's still listed in your will, but as per your wishes, Olivia's name has been removed entirely." I closed my eyes, feeling tears of relief slip down my cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Green, truly." He chuckled softly. "You don't owe me thanks. You did this yourself. You had the courage to protect what mattered." After the call, I sat quietly for a long time. The world outside my window was still and peaceful. It wasn't triumph I felt, not even satisfaction, just peace. A calm so deep it felt like silence after a storm. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat at the small table, hands wrapped around the warm mug. I thought of Henry, his steady presence, his laughter, the life we'd built together. I thought of the porch he'd painted, the flowers he'd planted. They were still there, waiting. And then, I thought of Olivia, the woman who'd whispered that I was a burden. She had tried to erase me, and in the end, she'd only erased herself. But the final act of justice wasn't over, not until I whispered her name away. It's strange, the sound of justice is softer than I ever imagined. A few days after the court dismissed Olivia's claim, Mr. Green called me again. His tone was warm, the way a father might speak to a daughter he's proud of. "Eleanor," he said, "I think it's time we finalize the paperwork we discussed months ago. The new will, the clause, everything. Are you ready?" "Yes," I said. "Completely ready." The following morning, I took the bus to his office. The sky was overcast, gray clouds pressing low over the town. But inside, his office glowed with that comforting amber light that always made me feel safe. There were fresh flowers on the desk, daisies, my favorite. I wondered if his secretary remembered or if he did. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. "It's good to see you smiling again," he said. "It's been a long time since I've had a reason to," I admitted. We sat together as he pulled out a stack of papers, each one neatly clipped, my name printed at the top. "This," he said, tapping the first document, is your updated will. It reflects all the changes we discussed. You retain ownership of your home through your life estate, and your assets are secured under your private trust. He flipped to the next page. Upon your passing, your son Daniel inherits a portion of your estate, but with the clause intact, the one requiring him to maintain good faith and respectful care. If he fails to do that, or if he ever attempts to involve Olivia again, the inheritance defaults to charity, as you requested. I nodded slowly. And Olivia? Mr. Green's lips curved into a small smile. Completely excluded. Her name no longer appears anywhere in your legal documents. For a moment I didn't speak. I just stared at the papers, neat, cold, decisive. Years of whispers, humiliation, and quiet pain condensed into ink on a page. Would you like me to read it aloud before you sign? He asked gently. I shook my head. No. I trust you, Mr. Green. He handed me the pen, its silver tip gleaming under the lamp. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the first page, then the second, and finally the last. Each stroke felt like shedding a layer of sorrow, reclaiming a piece of myself. When I was done, he gathered the documents carefully and slipped them into a folder. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice almost to a whisper. Eleanor, he said. It's done. Her name is gone. For a long moment, the words hung in the air between us. Her name is gone. It wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeful. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that carries peace instead of fury. The kind that feels like forgiveness, even when you never receive an apology. I exhaled slowly, tears blurring my vision. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that. I think I do, he said softly. You've shown more grace than most could manage. I smiled faintly. Grace isn't something you're born with, Mr. Green. It's something you find when anger stops working. He nodded thoughtfully, his eyes kind. And what will you do now? I looked out the window at the gray sky beginning to break, sunlight threading through the clouds. Live, I said simply. For myself this time. He smiled. Good. You've earned it. I left his office with the folder in my bag and a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. The streets were wet from a passing drizzle, glistening under the pale Sunday. I stopped at a cafe on the corner and ordered a small cup of coffee. It tasted stronger than I remembered, real, grounding, alive. As I sat by the window, I thought about everything that had happened. The woman who had called me a burden, the son who had forgotten his mother's worth, and the years I'd spent shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I realized then that I hadn't truly been living, I'd just been surviving. And now, in the quiet hum of that little cafe, I finally felt the difference. That evening, as I walked home, I saw a small bookstore near the park. Its window display was cluttered with secondhand novels and old poetry collections. On impulse, I stepped inside. The scent of paper and ink greeted me like an old friend. An elderly man behind the counter looked up. Looking for something in particular? No. I said, smiling. Just something honest. He chuckled. That's harder to find than most people think. I left with a worn copy of Little Women and a sense that my life was slowly beginning again, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as Eleanor. When I got home, I brewed tea and sat by the window, listening to the faint sounds of the city. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. I opened the folder. Mr. Green had given me and looked at the top page one last time, my name, bold and unshaken. No Olivia. No shared ownership. No whispers of burden. I closed the folder, pressing my hand against it, and smiled. Justice didn't come in fire or fury, it came in ink and patience. A few days later, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was small, tired. Mom, he said softly, I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me. My throat tightened. I never gave up, Daniel. I just needed you to see clearly. I do now, he whispered. I'm sorry for everything. We didn't talk long, but it was enough. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in years, humility, and maybe hope. When I hung up, I looked around my little apartment, the books stacked neatly, the flowers blooming on the sill, the peace humming through the air. I realized that the revenge I thought I wanted had quietly turned into something else. It wasn't about punishing Olivia anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, my voice, my worth, my life. And as I turned off the light that night, I whispered to the quiet room, "Her name is gone." It wasn't bitterness that filled me then. It was freedom. For all her whispers of burden, she'd written her own ending. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it just gives it a place to rest. It was a gray Sunday afternoon when I heard the knock on my door. 3 slow taps, hesitant, uncertain. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. A mother always knows, the rhythm of her child's hand. When I opened the door, there stood Daniel. He looked thinner, paler. The confident son who once carried himself like the world owed him something, now stood before me like a boy asking to be let inside after breaking a window. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks. Just that single word, Mom, made my chest ache. "Come in, Daniel," I said, stepping aside. He entered slowly, his eyes darting around the small apartment as if measuring the distance between us. "You've made this place nice," he murmured. "It feels warm." "It's peaceful," I said. "That's what I needed." He nodded, his gaze falling to the floor. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." I motioned toward the couch. "You're my son, I'll always want to see you." He sat, clasping his hands together, his voice trembling slightly. "Olivia's gone." I didn't react. I simply poured us both tea from the pot I'd just made. "Gone?" "She left," he said, staring at the steam rising from his cup. "After the court ruling, after Mr. Green explained everything, she said I embarrassed her, that I let you humiliate her." He gave a bitter laugh. As if she hadn't done enough herself. I sat across from him, studying his face. He looked older, not in years, but in spirit, like the weight of regret had settled into his bones. "I should have seen it, Mom," he continued. "I should have stopped her. All those things she said to you, the way she treated you. I was too busy pretending everything was fine. I thought keeping quiet would keep the peace." I nodded softly. "Silence doesn't keep peace, Daniel. It just lets the noise grow louder in the dark." He looked up at me, eyes wet. "You have every right to hate me." "Hate?" I repeated. "No, Daniel, I don't hate you." His brow furrowed, as if he didn't believe me. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but steady. "You disappointed me, you hurt me, but hate? No, hate is heavy. I carried enough of that already. I won't carry any more." He swallowed hard, his lip trembling. "I thought she loved me." "She did," I said softly. "In her own way. But her love was about ownership, not kindness. There's a difference." He nodded, staring into his tea. "I can't believe I let it get that far. I almost lost you. I almost lost everything." I reached out and took his hand. It was cold, trembling slightly. "You lost me for a while, yes. But sometimes, losing someone is the only way to learn how to hold them properly again." He looked at me, then really looked. The boy I raised flickered back through the man he'd become. "Can you ever forgive me?" he whispered. "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you earn, Daniel. It's a choice I make so we can both move forward." He wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. "You always make it sound so simple." "It's not," I said with a small smile. "But simple doesn't mean easy." We sat in silence for a long moment, sipping our tea. The rain began tapping softly against the window, the world outside gray and blurred. He finally spoke again. "What will you do now? Stay here?" "For a while," I said. "I like it here. It's mine. Every book, every cup, every corner, it all belongs to me." He nodded, then hesitated. Would you ever consider coming home?" I looked at him carefully. Home, Daniel, isn't a place. It's a feeling. And that house hasn't felt like home for a long time. He lowered his eyes. I understand. I reached over and touched his cheek lightly, the way I used to when he was small. One day, maybe, when it feels right again, when it feels like love again. He smiled through his tears. I'll make it right, Mom. I promise. I know you will, I said softly. But this time, do it for yourself, not for me. He stayed for another hour. We didn't talk about the past anymore. Instead, we talked about his work. The projects he wanted to start. The small things that gave him joy. I listened, smiling. Grateful to hear life in his voice again. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me tightly, tighter than he had in years. I felt the weight of his guilt, his sorrow, and his love all wrapped up in that single embrace. As he pulled away, I saw a faint smile on his face. You always forgive too easily, Mom. I shook my head. No, Daniel. I forgive when it's time. That's different. He laughed softly, his eyes glistening. You're stronger than anyone I know. Maybe, I said, walking him to the door. Or maybe I just learned how to stop breaking for people who don't see the cracks they cause. He nodded, silent, and stepped out into the rain. I watched him walk down the street until he disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The house was quiet again, but not empty. This time, the silence felt kind. Only when a home feels like love again. That's what I told him, and I meant it. Because forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about making peace with the pieces that remain. Starting over at 67 isn't an ending, it's a rebirth. After Daniel's visit, something inside me shifted. The air in my apartment felt lighter, the walls less like protection and more like possibility. For the first time in a long while, I woke up without that weight in my chest, the one that used to whisper that I was unwanted, unseen, unneeded. Every morning, I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, opened the curtains, and let the light in. I'd sit at my small table by the window, the same one where I'd once opened that letter from Mr. Green, and simply breathe. No whispers, no tension, no pretending to smile for someone who despised me, just peace. I started rebuilding my days from scratch. Small habits that stitched my life back together. A morning walk through the park. Reading an old book in the afternoons. Baking cookies on Sundays. Simple things, but each one felt like a brick in a new foundation I was finally building for myself. It surprised me how easy it became to fill my own time. I volunteered more at the library, where the children began calling me Miss Ellie. The nickname made me laugh at first. It sounded too young, too playful, but it warmed something deep inside me. When I read stories aloud, their laughter echoed through the aisles, and I remembered what joy sounded like. One of the librarians, Carol, often sat with me after closing. We'd drink tea in paper cups and talk about everything from childhood memories to books we'd loved and lost. You have such a calm way about you, she said once. Like you've lived through storms and came out choosing peace. I smiled. That's exactly it. Peace is a choice. Outside of the library, I began attending a community group for widows. It wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but the women there, strong, funny, kind, reminded me that life doesn't stop when love does. We shared stories of heartbreak and survival, and one by one, I realized I wasn't the only one who'd been made to feel small. Every meeting, someone would talk about loss not just of husbands, but of identity, of belonging. And every time, I'd remind them, you don't lose yourself unless you stop looking for her. My confidence grew slowly, like a plant reaching for the sun after too long in the dark. I learned to take up space again, to speak without fear of being silenced, to laugh loudly, to wear colors brighter than the beige Olivia used to insist looked more appropriate for my age. Mr. Green still checked in from time to time. Sometimes we met for lunch near his office. He'd bring updates about the trust and my property, though by then everything was secure and quiet. We started talking about other things, life, memories, even favorite movies. One afternoon, as we sat by the cafe window, he said, You know, Eleanor, Most people your age would have crumbled under what you went through. I chuckled softly. Oh, I did crumble, but then I decided to rebuild myself better than before. He smiled. I can see that. We spoke about Henry once briefly, gently. Mr. Green had known him too, back when they'd worked on the first will. He always talked about how strong you were, he said. I looked down at my cup. Funny thing is, I never believed him until recently. As the months went by, I realized that strength wasn't something I needed to find anymore, it was something I'd already built, quietly, in the spaces between all the hurt. I started keeping a new journal, not one of pain or evidence, but of gratitude. Each night, I wrote down one thing I was thankful for. Some days, it was simple, the smell of rain, the taste of warm bread, the sound of children laughing. Other days, it was deeper forgiveness, healing, freedom. My old home still stood, untouched, waiting for me. Mr. Green reminded me I could return any time I wanted. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. That house held too many ghosts, not of Henry, but of all the moments I'd been made to feel small. I wanted to make sure that when I did go back, I'd walk through those doors as someone unbreakable. Occasionally, Daniel called. His voice grew steadier each time. He'd tell me about his work, the new friends he was making, the therapy he'd started attending. Once he even said, I've been going to the house, taking care of the garden like Dad used to. The wisteria's blooming again. That made me smile. Keep it alive, Daniel. It was his favorite. I will, he said softly. And maybe one day you'll come see it. Maybe, replied. When it feels like home again. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I'd come. From a frightened widow who felt like a burden to a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet, unafraid of silence or solitude. I understood something then. Revenge isn't always about destroying someone else. Sometimes it's about rebuilding yourself so completely that the people who tried to break you no longer recognize what they shattered. I began smiling more at strangers. At the mirror. Even at my reflection in the shop windows when I passed by. I no longer saw a fragile old woman. I saw Eleanor resilient, dignified, alive. Peace had become my rebellion. One morning, as I watered the plants by my window, a small butterfly landed on the rim of the pot, delicate, trembling, but vibrant. I stood there, smiling, feeling a strange sense of recognition. It reminded me of myself fragile once, but no longer afraid to fly again. But fate had one more surprise waiting at my doorstep. The past has a way of finding you even in neat envelopes. It was a bright afternoon in early spring when I found the letter. I'd just returned from the library. My arms filled with donated books for the children's corner. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. I almost missed the envelope at first. It was wedged between a magazine and a utility bill, sitting quietly on my doormat. My name was written across the front in elegant, looping handwriting I knew too well. Olivia. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it. The sight of her name brought back a rush of memories I thought I'd buried for good, her cutting whispers, her cold smiles. The nights I lay awake listening to her poison drip into my son's ears. I considered throwing it away right then and there. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was closure calling in the form of a white envelope. I placed it on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea before opening it. My hands didn't tremble. Not this time. I wasn't the same woman she used to belittle. When I finally tore it open, the paper inside was thick. The ink slightly smudged. I began to read. Eleanor. You probably don't want to hear from me. But I need to say this before it eats me alive. I know you have every reason to hate me, and maybe I deserve that. I was cruel. I was selfish. I took my anger out on you when you didn't deserve it. After you left, everything fell apart. Daniel tried to hold things together, but I made that impossible. I was angry that I couldn't control what was happening, angry that you'd won, though now I realize there was nothing to win. I've lost Daniel, our home, our friends, everything. I'm living with my sister now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I see it all clearly now. I see what I became. You weren't a burden, Eleanor. I was. I just didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry. Olivia, I set the letter down slowly. The apartment was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I read the words again, each line softer, smaller. For the first time since everything had begun, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. Just peace. Olivia had been cruel, yes. But underneath all her venom had been fear of losing control, of aging, of being insignificant. Fear can make people dangerous. I knew that now. I walked to the window, the letter still in my hand, and looked out at the park across the street. A group of children were playing tag, their laughter spilling through the open glass. It was the same laughter I heard every week at the library. The sound that reminded me of why I'd chosen peace over bitterness. I thought about writing back something short, simple, polite. But as I sat down to find the words, I realized I had none to give. Not out of hatred, but because there was nothing left to say. Her apology wasn't for me, it was for her. And that was fine. Some apologies are only meant to free the one who gives them. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it back into its envelope. Then I walked to the small fireplace in my living room, the one I rarely used except on cold nights. I struck a match, watched the flame flicker to life, and set the letter gently onto the logs. The paper curled almost instantly, the ink bleeding and fading as the fire consumed it. For a moment, I saw her words turn to ash, rising like smoke toward the ceiling, fleeting, weightless, gone. I whispered, "I forgive you." Not because she would hear it, but because I needed to hear myself say it. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about absolving someone else. It was about untangling yourself from their shadow. And as the last of the letter burned away, I felt completely free. I spent the rest of the day in quiet reflection. I watered my plants, called Carol from the library, and baked a batch of cookies for the children's story hour. Life continued, simple and steady, like the rhythm of a song I finally knew by heart. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I looked up at the stars and thought of Henry. I imagined his warm smile, his patient eyes. I imagined him saying, "You did it, Eleanor. You made it through." I smiled, whispering softly, "I did, love. I really did." The next morning, the air was crisp and clear. I opened all the windows, letting the scent of spring fill my apartment. I stood there for a long moment, watching the sunlight pour in, golden and forgiving. There were no more whispers in my life, no more judgments, no more manipulation. Just the quiet hum of peace, the kind that grows only after a long storm has passed. And as the ashes rose, I finally knew what freedom sounded like. Sometimes, healing walks through the same doors that once broke you. A full year passed after Olivia's letter. The seasons turned, the leaves changed, and life settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. My days were peaceful mornings at the park, afternoons at the library, evenings spent in the gentle company of books and tea. I'd rebuilt myself, piece by piece, until even the mirror reflected someone new. Then, one morning, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, I heard a familiar voice, soft, careful, and warm. "Mom?" Daniel said. "It's me." There was a pause, that kind of pause where 1,000 things hang between words. "Hello, Daniel," I said, smiling into the quiet. "How are you?" "I'm good," he said quickly, then laughed a little. "Actually, I'm better than I've been in years. I was wondering, could we have dinner? Just us?" I hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded to myself. I'd like that very much. We agreed to meet that Saturday evening at his new home. He'd moved out of the old house, he told me, into a smaller one just outside town. "It's nothing fancy," he'd said, "but it feels real." When Saturday came, I dressed simply a navy blouse, the pearl earrings Henry had given me on our anniversary, and my favorite shawl, the new one I'd knitted myself. I carried no resentment, no expectations, only calm curiosity. The sun was dipping low when I arrived. Daniel's house stood at the end of a quiet street, a cozy little cottage surrounded by a garden just starting to bloom. For a moment, I stood at the gate, breathing in the scent of fresh soil and honeysuckle. He opened the door before I could knock. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said softly. "And you look tired," I teased, smiling. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." The house was small but inviting, wooden floors, soft light, and the faint scent of rosemary and garlic drifting from the kitchen. On the wall by the staircase hung framed photos not of grand vacations or luxury, but simple moments. Daniel smiling at a park, Daniel holding a puppy, Daniel beside a group of friends. It struck me then how much lighter he looked. We sat down at a wooden table set for two. He'd cooked roast chicken with vegetables, simple, hearty, familiar. "I've been learning," he said sheepishly. "Cooking helps me think. Your father used to say the same," I said. "He always claimed a full stomach made for a clear mind." Daniel smiled, and for the first time in years, his eyes held peace instead of guilt. We talked for hours about my work at the library, about his job, about life. The conversation flowed easily, unforced, as though time itself had been waiting for us to find our rhythm again. At one point, Daniel looked down, his voice quiet. "I went by the old house last week," he said. "The wisteria's still blooming. I've been taking care of the garden." I smiled. "Your father would be proud." "I think about him a lot lately," he admitted. "About what he'd think of all this, everything that happened." "He'd tell you what he always told both of us," I said softly. "That love isn't proven by words, it's proven by who stays when the storm comes." Daniel nodded slowly. "I stayed too late, but I'm staying now." I reached across the table, touching his hand. "That's all that matters." There was a long silence, not awkward but full. Then Daniel smiled shyly. "I wanted you to meet someone soon. Not tonight, but someday. Her name's Claire. She's kind, Mom. Gentle. She knows everything, and she doesn't judge." My heart softened. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd love to meet her." He grinned, looking almost boyish again. "I think you'll get along. She's been telling me to fix the old porch, says it looks like something out of a memory." We both laughed. For the first time, laughter didn't feel like a fragile truce, it felt like home. After dinner, he brought out a small box wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you," he said, his eyes shining with something unspoken. Inside was a photo, an old one, carefully framed. It was of me and Henry on our wedding day, standing in front of the house when it was still new. The frame was carved wood, simple but beautiful. "I found it when I was cleaning out the attic," Daniel said. "I thought it belonged with you." I held the photo close, my throat tightening. "Thank you," I whispered. "You have no idea how much this means." He looked at me earnestly. "Mom, thank you. For everything. For never giving up on me. Even when I didn't deserve it." Tears filled my eyes. But they weren't from sadness, they were from the quiet miracle of forgiveness fulfilled. When I left later that evening, the sky was deep blue and dotted with stars. Daniel walked me to the car, and as we stood there under the porch light, he hugged me again tighter than ever before. "I love you, Mom," he said into my shoulder. "I love you too, Daniel," I whispered back. "Always." As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him standing on the porch, waving. The porch light cast a golden glow around him, the same light Henry used to fix whenever it flickered. Somehow, I knew everything was finally where it belonged. And that night, I realized revenge wasn't the ending, it was the beginning of peace. Justice isn't about punishment, it's about peace finding its voice again. It's been 2 years since the night I overheard Olivia whisper that I was a burden. 2 years since I packed my suitcase before dawn and left behind everything familiar. 2 years since I found myself again. When I wake each morning now, sunlight fills my apartment like an old friend, warm, steady, patient. I make my tea, open the curtains, and let the world in. The bitterness that once weighed on my heart has faded into something gentler, something wiser. I no longer measure my worth by what others say, but by the calm I carry when I'm alone. The past doesn't haunt me anymore. It visits sometimes, quietly like the echo of a song you once loved. And when it does, I smile, because I know that even the pain served a purpose. It taught me what strength really is. People often say revenge is sweet, but they're wrong. Revenge isn't sweet, it's silent. It doesn't arrive with fire and fury. It comes in the quiet moments when you finally realize you've survived what was meant to break you. One morning in early summer, I returned to the old house. Mr. Green accompanied me, insisting I shouldn't go alone. The drive there was long but familiar, the road winding through the same rows of oak trees Henry and I once walked beneath on our evening strolls. When we pulled up to the driveway, I felt my heart catch. The house looked smaller somehow, but still standing proud and patient. The porch wisteria had bloomed again, purple and fragrant, curling around the white rails Henry built by hand. Daniel had kept his promise. I stepped out of the car slowly, breathing in the scent of home. Memories came rushing back, Henry hammering nails on a summer afternoon, Daniel chasing a red ball across the lawn, me calling them in for dinner as the sun dipped low. The years folded into one tender moment of stillness. Mr. Green walked beside me, smiling. "You did it, Eleanor," he said softly. "You've kept it all, the house, your peace, your dignity." I nodded, my eyes misting, and lost nothing that mattered. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. Daniel had cleaned it recently. I could tell by the neatness, the absence of dust, the fresh flowers on the table. A photo of him and me sat on the mantel, one from our dinner together. Seeing it made me smile. "I think I'll start coming here on weekends," I told Mr. Green. "It's time the house feels alive again." He nodded approvingly. "A good idea, it deserves laughter again." When he left later that afternoon, I stayed behind. I wandered from room to room, tracing my fingers over the furniture, the walls, the quiet history that still lingered there. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt like it was waiting not for me to return as I was, but for me to return as who I'd become. As I stood in the doorway of the old kitchen, sunlight fell across the floor in golden ribbons. The same spot where I'd once stood frozen, listening to Olivia whisper my worth away, now felt like sacred ground. I whispered softly, "I was never a burden." And in that quiet, it felt as though the house whispered back, "I know." I spent the evening on the porch, watching the sunset. Daniel arrived just before dusk, bringing dinner in a basket. "Claire made too much pasta," he said, laughing. "She insists you eat some." I grinned. "Tell her she's already won me over." We ate together, talking about simple things, the garden, the neighbors, the plans he and Claire had for a small wedding next spring. It all felt so ordinary, and yet, for me, it was extraordinary. Ordinary life was something I'd fought for, the quiet kind that grows out of healing. When Daniel stood to leave, he hesitated by the porch steps. "Mom," he said, "I think Dad would be proud of you." I smiled gently. "I think he'd be proud of us." After he left, I sat there alone as the stars appeared one by one. The night was cool, the air humming softly with the sound of crickets. I closed my eyes and listened, not for voices of the past, but for the peace that now filled their place. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness and revenge aren't opposites. Sometimes, they're the same road, just walked at different speeds. My revenge had never been about destruction, it was about restoration. About making sure the world saw my worth again, and that I did too. I no longer carried anger toward Olivia. In some strange way, her cruelty had shaped my awakening. Without her, I might have spent the rest of my life believing I needed to be small to be loved. That night, before leaving the house, I walked back inside and stood in the hallway one last time. I whispered to the quiet walls. "Justice isn't loud, Henry. It whispers." The floorboards creaked softly, almost like a sigh. I locked the door gently behind me and stepped out into the cool night air. The moon hung low, silver and soft, lighting the path ahead. On the drive home, I rolled down the window and let the breeze tangle my hair. I thought about everything I'd lost, and everything I'd found in its place: peace, independence, strength, and most of all, self-respect. I no longer feared whispers. I'd learned to make them my own. When I arrived back at my apartment, I lit a single candle on the table and sat beside it. The flame danced quietly, steady and sure, casting a soft glow over the room. In that golden light, I whispered the words that had become my truth words, that no one could ever take from me again. I was never a burden. I was the foundation they forgot to honor. The candle flickered, the room held its breath, and for the first time in years, I felt completely free.